Have you ever wondered if you are mounting your electric motors correctly? Hey everyone, in this episode we are going to be installing the Extreme Flight Xpwr 30cc electric motor, and then we'll go ahead, install the cowling, and take care of the whole front end of the Seagull Perestroika. So let's go ahead and zoom in and get to work. All right, here's all the parts we're going to need. Here's the motor itself, and the prop shaft adapter screws on top, and the motor mount screws on the back, and the motor comes with the bolt connectors already connected. Here's the prop or shaft adapter that fits nice and snug on the top, and you have the prop bolt and the washer down there. We'll show you how that goes on real quick. Easy peasy. So notice about the mount that the 4 inner holes are recessed, and that is for the screws. When we open up the bag, and you'll see those will fit into the recessed holes in the motor mount, and it mounts onto the back of the motor like that. So as we're preparing, we are going to have to mount the motor mount onto the electric conversion motor box that comes with the Seagull Perestroika. So here's this box. It's really sturdy and thick, and it's built so you can choose a different motor, a different length, and this piece moves back and forth to accommodate different motor sizes. So before we mount the X mount to the motor, I wanted to drill these holes first so we weren't having to mess around with the heavy motor drilling all these holes. So what we're going to do is the center hole is already scored with diagonal lines. I'm going to take a straight edge and extend out those straight lines for the 4 corners. That way we'll be able to align the motor mount. But first, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to make some quick marks at the end of the X's, because I want to know when I'm drawing my line, I want to know how far at least I need to get these lines. This is a really, I don't know, kind of a basic step here, but I just wanted to make sure I drew the lines long enough in those 4 corners right there. So now we go ahead and get our straight edge, and let's go ahead and draw these diagonal lines so we can place the motor perfectly center over the hole. First one's done. We'll go for the other one. I think it's very valuable to have some smaller straight edges on your tool bench for situations like this. I have used this straight edge, and I have a triangle edge from the same company that I've used so many times over the past year. I highly recommend looking in and getting some small straight edges. All right, now we have the X mount, and here is where we're going to have to take some time to make sure those lines that we just drew go through the center of those 4 holes. And I actually stopped the camera here and did it a little bit. Took my time, probably a couple minutes, to make sure it was spot on. And I went and grabbed some clamps that you'll see here, because I'm holding it really tight because I didn't want it to slide or anything. Went and got my clamps, and now I'm clamping it down here so then we could drill these holes. Now this is optional. This is me trying to be exact as possible. You don't need to clamp this down, but this was just my attempt to make sure I kept the X mount right centered on those extended lines, diagonal lines, to drill these holes. And here, this was actually just kind of an excuse to use my new Garrett Wade kind of push drill. I got this for Christmas from my wife, and normally I'd want to start a pilot hole with an awl or something, but my awl, even though it's small, it's really powerful, and since this motor mount has that elevated plate that moves back and forth, I think I would have caused damage using it. So I used the smallest bit on this little push drill just to start these pilot holes, and this was actually the first time I've used it on wood, and the action is really nice. It's a really cool tool. I'll put a link in the description for it. You can see it uses special bits, and so all you do is push down and it drills through. It's really kind of neat. So I was happy to have an excuse to use it, even though it wasn't technically necessary. But now I'm going to get out the little drill with a 3mm bit, and we'll start here. We'll start with the 3mm. And actually, what I'm going to do, I'm going to fully do these bottom holes and then screw it on with the bolts and then drill the top holes, just so we don't have any misalignment if something moves just a little bit. So we take the 3 off, put the 4 on, which is the size of the holes in the X-mount. And because we're using blind nuts, the manual is stating that we should go with a 5.5mm hole. Enlarge this. So we're going to take off the X-mount to enlarge it a little bit for the blind nuts, and then we'll go from there. I did make an effort to keep the place clean of sawdust, but that never happens. And by the end of the segment, you'll see how sawdusty my cut mat is. So now that we have the X-mount out, I'll go ahead. I didn't have a 5.5mm. I just had a 5. So we'll just enlarge these holes just a little bit. And again, this is to accommodate the blind nuts from the back. And it might look like my little mini drill is struggling, and you're thinking, geez, Moose, you started a video without a charged battery again. But actually, it's not the case. This is that plate is pretty thick. It's almost I would say it's 3/4 of an inch thick. So my little drill didn't have the power. It was struggling a little bit, but we got it. So now we take the bolts, and I'm holding the blind nut with my hand behind the plate, and I'm just kind of doing a test to make sure the blind nut can get in there. Obviously, you don't want to torque it down here because I don't have a big washer on there. But this was just an initial test to make sure that we have clearance for the blind nut and everything was good before I was messing around with the X-mount. So we're going to take this out and put the X-mount on and kind of use that as the big washer before we torque down to seat the blind nut. And actually, it's kind of awkward, these bottom holes, because if you see, I have to kind of slide my fingers in there to hold the blind nut. It's a little awkward. It's not impossible. It just takes an extra minute or two. And that's what you see me. I'm pulling it close to get a better eye to see how I can hold that. But I'm holding the blind nut now and tightening down the bolt. And I'm not going to crank it down yet because I want to get the other blind nut in there. And then once that's in there, we'll go ahead and crank it down. So again, holding the blind nut with the fingers down in the bottom of the electric motor box, and then we'll be able to tighten. All right, so now we're seeing, you can see the bolts are in, but the blind nuts aren't fully seated. So now with the X-mount as a washer, we are going to, you see me torquing down, seating those blind nuts nice and tight. I'm trying to hold it to show you it going in. In fact, I needed to use my finger through that little hole to hold it just at the beginning. And now if you look closely, you can see it being pulled into the wood there. All right, those two are seated, so now we can go ahead and drill the top two holes. And not knowing when I'm going to be able to use this push drill again, I said, okay, let's make these pilot holes. This is fun to use this. We'll speed this up because these top two holes will look very similar to the bottom, but a little bit easier. So now we go with the 3. Change to the 4. And now we're really torquing things down. So I moved to my Wera tool that really has a nice big handle, and especially if I want to torque things down, I like to use the tools with the bigger handle. So I really like this Wera multi-tool. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's become one of my go-to tools. All right, so we've taken the X mount out because we have one more step, in which is to enlarge these top holes to 5mm. So that's what you just saw me do. We're enlarging those last 2 holes to 5mm with the 5mm bit, and we will then set the blind nuts in the back. So first we'll reapply the bottom bolts into their blind nuts. So now we're doing the top ones. Again, just holding the blind nut underneath to get it started so it grips the back of the wood, and then you can really start torquing down the bolt to seat. And here again, you can see these tops 2 are seated but not pulled in all the way, and so you will see me start torquing things here. And it's a little awkward because that board moves, but I wanted to show here, torquing it down and bringing in that blind nut. Go on to the last bolt and blind nut. And the motor will sit like this. All right, now time to prepare the motor. And so you will get a bag of screws, and there will be 7 screws, 3 for the prop shaft adapter and 4 to mount the motor to the X mount. And the X mount motor bolts, screws are countersunk. You'll be able to see them very easily, and they're Phillips. The prop shaft adapter is I think it's an M3, so you would use a 2.5mm driver for that. So I like to separate out the bolts. That's what you're seeing me do there. I got my stick of Loctite. This is imperative for this step. You should always use Loctite when attaching these prop adapters and the X mount. And so I will extend the stick a little bit, and we'll do the prop adapter first. So I get the bolt on there and just kind of graze the bolt across the Loctite. You want to cover the threads, but you don't want to have a big goop on there. You don't want to have too much, but you want to just get a nice light coat on the threads and go ahead and thread it in there. And sorry, I realized I had covered up the application there, so next I'll try to hold the motor a little bit sideways. But you see on that one I thought I had a little bit too much, and so I grazed some of it off. But again, just to cover the threads, not too much. You just need a little bit, but I try to get most of the threads covered when I kind of graze it across the stick. And we'll just go ahead and go around each one of these bolts to tighten them down. I like to go around twice because in situations like this, when you tighten one, that kind of tightens the whole thing and the other ones become looser. So just go around and make sure they're nice and tight. So the prop shaft adapter is done, and now we'll go to mounting the X mount. And right now I'm realizing I probably should have done the X mount first, because now I can't set it upside down because of the prop is there. Neither here nor there we'll be able to get it done. So these, even though they're small, a number 2 Phillips screwdriver works really well. You'll see me preparing my number 2 bit, and again, we're just making sure that you see those countersunk holes. And we'll do the same thing with the Loctite, just a little bit. You can see I think I got a little bit too much and I try to wipe it off. We'll speed up the rest because it's very much a lot more of the same, but we're just seating in these X-mount screws with Loctite. So I get them pretty snug at first. I don't torque down yet. I want to get them all in there nice and decently snug, nothing too hard. Then I'll go around to each one of them, tighten them as much as I can. For these, I like bringing out the big boy. This vessel, I love this screwdriver. This is my go-to bad boy screwdriver, and I always bring it in to do exactly this. Torque down just a little bit more because it's a nice big grip and feels good. So now the motor is pretty much done. We're going to mount and show you again how that washer and bolt go on, and we're all set. So we're running long. We'll get to the cowl in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in a few days.